Tania Galloni. I hope I pronounced that correctly. No, I didn't. She'll tell you what it is. And she is the managing attorney for the Florida office of the Southern Poverty Law Center, a civil rights organization dedicated to fighting hate and bigotry and to seek justice for the most vulnerable members of our society. Ms. Galloni leads the office's efforts to reform educational and juvenile justice systems that are counterproductive to society and the destruction of young lives.
Thanks very much. And I know why everybody's here tonight, and that's to have shelter from the storm outside. I wish I had my remarks as prepared as Rika did, but I'm going to do the best that I can. The good news, bad news is you don't have to look outside of Florida to understand the problem with trying kids as adults in the state of Florida. In just the past 5 years, we have tried more than 10,000 children as adults in the state of Florida. Trying kids as adults was considered a departure from the juvenile justice system for the most egregious cases where a kid might be considered irredeemable, an irredeemable menace to society. Well, we don't have that many irredeemable menaces to society, but we sure are sending a whole lot of kids into the adult system. We're one of only 14 states that allows prosecutors to decide which cases go into adult court. And we're one of only 4 states that never allows a judge to review that decision. That means that the prosecutor has in their hands the sole power, the sole discretion to decide which cases get sent to adult court. That includes, by the way, the mandatory direct file cases. The mandatory direct file provision in the laws creates an exception if the prosecutor wants to use his or her discretion not to direct file. So even the cases that are labeled as mandatory are not mandatory. The prosecutor has the discretion to decide which cases to send to adult court. We think of the judicial system as a balance of scales, right? We think that there are 2 sides and that there's a neutral arbiter in the middle who's going to make a decision about what's right. But these kids who are facing the possibility of adult court never get that chance. They don't get that chance, their parents don't get that chance, there's no opportunity to appear before a judge and say, my case should not go to adult court and here's why. Most of these kids are charged with nonviolent offenses. But let me tell you that even some of the kids charged with violent offenses are not people that you would consider irredeemable menaces to society. Warren is only one of them, but there are many, many, many more. I met a young man in Polk County who had punched a classmate in the jaw, didn't know his own strength. Single punch, broke his jaw, knocked him out cold. First-time offender, never been in trouble with the law, good student. He spent a year in adult jail. He spent a year in adult jail until he finally took a plea just to be able to go home. And taking that plea meant what? He pled to an adult felony conviction, so he is now what we call branded for life, carrying that scarlet F for the rest of his life. He's a convicted felon. He's going to have limited educational opportunities, limited employment opportunities. He has lost the right to vote before he ever had the right to vote. Escambia County is in a particularly dire situation, and I actually ran the charts just so I would have it straight in my mind. You know, statewide and nationally, there's been a decline in adult and juvenile crime. There's just been a downward trend, which is a great thing for everybody. Sometimes the prosecutors say, well, that's because we have direct file, but it's happening in every state, including all of those that don't have direct file. So statewide, we see crime trends are down, and for the most part, the direct file numbers and sending kids to adult court is down, but not so in Escambia. We have in Circuit 1, which covers all the counties that include Escambia, Walton, Santa Rosa, Okaloosa, the felony rates are down. They're not up. There's not an uptick. Here's a chart, Circuit 1. This is Department of Juvenile Justice data. Over the last 5 years, crime is down. Felony crimes. Escambia County, felony arrests among youth, down. But the numbers of kids being direct filed has increased over the last 4 years. This is something that we have come to call justice by geography. What kind of treatment you get depends on where you live. Right now, if you live in Escambia County, you're 4 times more likely to be tried as an adult than if you live in Miami-Dade. I'd heard a statement about how a comparison to Orange County isn't fair because Orange County's numbers have varied and so on. In the past year, Escambia County has transferred the same number of kids to adult court as Miami-Dade, not just Orlando, as Miami-Dade. With, those are jurisdictions with populations so much greater, and Orange has implemented some changes to bring their numbers down, but Escambia hasn't. Escambia has been slowly ticking up in the last 4 years. The rates you'll see vary dramatically, and what kind of treatment a kid receives in the juvenile justice system should not depend on where they live or who the prosecutor is. And I don't in any way mean to disparage the prosecutors, because I will say it's very difficult and it's a very important job. But we live in a system of justice where we believe that a neutral arbiter makes these kinds of decisions. The decision to transfer a child to adult court has life-changing consequences, and it begins, by the way, with being transferred to an adult facility and sitting in an adult jail and sitting in isolation. The kids are separated from adults, but a lot of times that means isolation, one of the most damaging, painful experiences for a young mind to go through. Their education is interrupted. Kids are not receiving adequate educational services in jail. And remember, when I'm talking about jail, that's pre-trial. That's before a child has been convicted of any offense. And children can spend 6 months, 8 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years pre-trial in a jail. I've often heard the prosecutors say, look, at the end of the day, the judge decides the sentence, and the judge has all this power, and the judge can do this, and the judge can do that. A couple things you should know. One is, if a child is transferred to adult court via indictment, like Christian Fernandez at age 12, the statute says adult punishment is mandatory. He's being allowed to serve some of that sentence in a juvenile facility, but adult punishment is mandatory, which means the Scarlet F, which means adult probation, which means ultimately carrying the baggage of an adult conviction for something that occurred at 12. These direct files that are considered mandatory but have an out, if the prosecutor wants to use their discretion not to direct file, those mandatory cases, the law requires adult sanctions be imposed. But the most important thing about the whole punishment question is something that you probably already know. Life is not like TV. Most cases are not going to trial. In fact, something like 95% of cases don't go to trial. 95% of cases are resolved by plea agreement. What does that mean? That means that the entity that is driving sentencing at the end of the day and at the beginning of the day is the prosecutor. The prosecutor has the ability to jack up the exposure that a person has in terms of the potential. Punishable by life. Great example. If I'm facing something that's now punishable by life, I'm going to take an agreement to something else. And when prosecutors have that power, and so many offenses in Florida are punishable by life, it really allows them to drive what they think the appropriate sentence is. Does the judge ultimately put their stamp of approval? Yes, but the prosecutors are driving sentencing because 95% of these cases are resolved by plea. We believe that that initial decision, whether a child is going to be tried as an adult, needs to be decided by a judge. Is this a radical idea? No. It's in the Florida statutes right now as we speak. There's a whole process called judicial waiver. Why isn't it used? 98% of the cases going to adult court are being sent there by prosecutorial direct file. 98%. Why aren't we using judicial waiver? Well, the reason is because in the 1990s, there were some very high-profile, extreme cases of teenagers that got a lot of media attention. And over the years, we've been giving the prosecutors more and more and more leeway to decide which cases go in and which cases stay out. And as a result of that, we're now at a place where 98% of the cases going to adult court are at the decision of the prosecutor alone. The judge can't overturn that decision, can't send it back to juvenile court, can't send the kid back to the juvenile facility. All of that in the prosecutor's discretion. The legislation that we've been advocating for did very well last session. We have a conservative legislature in many respects, but I think there's bipartisan recognition now of the need for reform in juvenile justice and also in adult criminal justice. The bills to involve the judge, to bring the judge back into the equation, last session passed the House Criminal Justice Committee by a vote of 12-1. The Senate Criminal Justice Committee by a vote of 4-1. The Senate Criminal Justice Appropriations Committee by a vote of 4-2. And then, as you know, the legislature sort of blew up, so they packed their bags and went home. We're back again this year, and the legislation, again, is bipartisan. The House bill is sponsored by Representative Katie Edwards from Broward, a Democrat, co-sponsored by Representative Kathleen Peters, a Republican from Pinellas. The Senate bill is sponsored by Miguel Diaz de la Portilla, a Republican from Miami-Dade County, and I'm happy to report that Senator Evers has scheduled that bill to be heard next Monday at 1 o'clock. That's Senate Bill 314, and we just got this news today. That's Senate Bill 314, so I urge folks to let Senator Evers know that you want to put judges back into the equation. We need just common sense back into this system and not let these lives get derailed. The potential that Spencer shows is the potential of a lot of these kids, and we should not be throwing it away. Thank you.